Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Finding Your Living Kidney Donor. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation listening with your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, select the arrow next to the mute/unmute icon in the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. Select Switch to phone audio and then select phone call and follow the prompts to dial in. By default, all the participants enter in the webinar with audio muted. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email within 5 to 7 days with a link for on-demand viewing. We're offering this webinar bilingually using simultaneous translation. If you would like to hear the presentation in French, choose French as your language preference in the interpretation icon in the Zoom toolbar. Nous offrons la traduction simultanée de ce webinaire de l'anglais au français. Si vous souhaitez entendre la présentation en français, choisissez votre langue préférée dans l'icône d'interprétation de la barre d'outils Zoom. For those of you joining on your computer, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions in the Q&A pane found in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the meeting window. Please avoid using the chat box to submit your questions. It helps us to monitor them more effectively when they are all submitted in the question pane. You may send in your questions in either language at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. In order to protect your privacy, when you ask a question, please do not use your name or provide any other personal identifying information. For those of you who have pre-submitted questions, please note that due to a high volume of questions submitted, your exact question may not be able to be answered directly. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for this webinar, Lydia Lauder, National Director of Programs and Public Policy at the Kidney Foundation.
Thank you, Janice, and welcome to our presenters and attendees. It's great to have you here today. Before we begin, the Kidney Foundation would like to thank our sponsors of the 2021 webinar series, Alexion, AstraZeneca, Horizon, Janssen, Otsuka, and Paladin. Organ donation saves lives and restores health. A kidney transplant is not a cure, but it offers the best possible improvement to health and quality of life for many people living with kidney failure. The only other life-sustaining treatment available is dialysis, which artificially cleans the blood. The need for organs for transplantation is much greater than the available supply. Both kinds of organ donation combined still don't meet the need for kidneys for transplantation. Wait times can vary from a few months to several years. Normally, everyone has 2 kidneys, although you can live a healthy life with just one. Living donation takes place when a person freely decides to donate a kidney to someone who needs a transplant. This offers the person waiting for a transplant an alternative to dialysis or deceased donor transplantation. Donating a kidney is the most common type of living organ donation. A living kidney transplant is the most successful of all transplant procedures. This webinar will share the experiences of patients with kidney disease looking for a potential living donor, the challenges they face, and how they overcame these challenges. The information shared today in today's webinar is current as of today, April 29, 2021. The material shared in this presentation is not intended to be medical advice. You should speak to your doctor about your own individual situation. This information is also intended for a Canadian audience. We are thrilled to introduce our speakers today. Thank you all for making the time to share this important information with us. We have a lot of content to cover, so please visit our website to read their complete bios. Ali Adams is a seasoned corporate communications professional and Senior Manager of Communications, Brand and Reputation at McCarthy Traw. A passionate advocate for type 1 diabetes, kidney disease and organ donation, Ali dedicates much of her personal time to the University Health Network in Toronto and the Kidney Foundation of Canada. Sean Delaney is Senior Advisor and Program Lead for the Interprovincial Organ Sharing with Canadian Blood Services and has played a key role in the development and implementation of all the kidney paired donation, highly sensitized kidney program, and emerging heart and liver interprovincial sharing programs in Canada. Sean is also a lifelong kidney patient whose journey began with post-urethral valve obstruction as an infant, eventually leading to kidney transplants at the age of 27 and again at the age of 49. Between those two transplants, Sean did a combination of hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis while he searched for potential living donors. Chief Michael Recalmer was elected Chief of Qualicum First Nations over 6 years ago. As Chief, he has an extremely busy job and a passion and dedication for his work, so much so that when he first fell unwell several years ago, he thought he had the flu and continued to focus on his responsibilities as Chief. He would later find out that he did not have the flu, but was in renal failure and needed dialysis. The Chief opted for peritoneal dialysis, for which he has been doing now for 3 years from home. The Chief is on the wait list for a kidney transplant and is actively looking for a living kidney donor. Always willing to share some words of wisdom and his story, the Chief continues his kidney journey with hope and optimism that he will receive a new kidney someday soon. Dr. Raul Manra is a transplant nephrologist in the Division of Nephrology at St. Paul's Hospital in Saskatoon. He's chair of the Living Donor Working Group for the Organ Donation and Transplant Collaborative and the Kidney Transplantation Advisory Committee for Canadian Blood Services. He's involved in various national collaborative research projects within the area of kidney transplantation. It is my pleasure to introduce Chief Recalmer for the territorial acknowledgement.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Recalmer. That's my taxable name. My proper name is Mugglies. I am elected Chief of Qualicum First Nation, but I also have ties to the Musqueam First Nation through my mother. I'm speaking from the traditional unceded territory of the Qualicum First Nation, and I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Recalmer. I'll hand it over to Dr. Mainra now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. And it's my pleasure and great honor of being here today to talk to you all about living kidney donation. And hopefully by the end of this talk, I'll be able to convince you that living donor kidney transplantation is the best option for you. So I thought we would start off with a poll just to see where everybody's at within their journey of kidney disease or what connection they have with other people that perhaps have kidney disease or donation or transplantation. So please feel free to best answer that as best you can. And Janice, I'll take your cue as to when you can close the poll and show us the answers. Great. So we've got a nice range and mixture of various journeys along the kidney disease spectrum. So most of our audience today are people with kidney disease, not on dialysis. We have a few that are on dialysis, some that are transplant recipients, living donors, and some healthcare workers. Great. Thank you for answering that. And you can go to the next slide. So people with chronic kidney disease, stage 5, which means that they have end-stage kidney disease, have a number of options. Firstly, they can choose to start dialysis, and that can be in the form of hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. And after some period of time being on dialysis, they can be assessed for suitability for receiving a kidney transplant. And that kidney transplant can be from a deceased donor. If we can just go back to no, that's okay. That kidney transplant can be from a deceased donor where they would be waiting with everybody within the province or your local center on the deceased donor wait list. And that waiting time can vary province to province, but in Canada, the average is around 3.5 years. The next option would be to receive a living donor kidney transplant. And we'll talk a little bit about today about what the benefits are from a living donor kidney transplant compared to a deceased donor kidney transplant. Firstly, one of the main benefits is that there's a significant decrease in waiting time. So if you had a living donor kidney transplant, you're waiting perhaps about a year and a half on average in Canada until your surgery is booked. Now, the best option, if you can advance to the next slide, please. The best option for patients with stage 5 kidney disease is to avoid dialysis completely and proceed directly to a living donor kidney transplant. And that provides you with even better overall outcomes of your kidney transplant. It avoids the need of dialysis and provides you with a much better quality of life. Next slide, please. So to summarize those couple of slides, living donor kidney transplant is definitely the best option for you. It provides you with better short and long-term outcomes. So if you had a deceased donor kidney transplant, your 5-year chance that your kidney is still working is roughly around 80% in Canada, where if you had a living donor kidney transplant, the chance that your kidney is still working after 5 years is 90%. So definitely better long-term outcomes with a living donor kidney transplant. And the short-term outcomes are improvement in rejection episodes with a living donor kidney transplant compared to a deceased donor kidney transplant. As I mentioned earlier, the best option for patients with kidney disease stage 5 is to not need dialysis or to avoid dialysis completely and have a preemptive transplantation. And in most provinces, that's usually only possible with a living donor kidney transplant. And that allows that 90% at 5-year outcome to be even better. So your outcomes are even much more improved with a living donor kidney transplant that you get without needing dialysis. And as I mentioned earlier, your waiting time on dialysis is much shorter, 3.5 years if you're waiting for a deceased donor versus about 1.5 years if you're waiting for a living donor transplant. So lots of great reasons as to why a living donor kidney transplant is the best option for you. Next slide, please. And many people, when we talk about living donation, always wonder if their living donor is compatible. And my response to them is always just find a healthy, committed donor who wants to help you, and we'll figure out the rest of it. If by chance they happen to be compatible with you, then we can definitely proceed with a directed donation where they donate their kidney directly to you. However, if they're not compatible with you, we've got in Canada the kidney pair donation where we would enter both you and your incompatible donor and find you a transplant that way. Next slide, please. And the next few slides are courtesy of the awesome team at CBS that's been managing the kidney pair donation in Canada. You can proceed to the next slide. And overall, the kidney pair donation has accounted for approximately 14 to 18% of all living donor kidney transplants in Canada. The goal would be to have that number at about 20%. So we still have a little bit of work to do, but as you can see, over the number of years, over the decade now, it's resulted in a large number of living donor kidney transplants in Canada. Next slide, please. And there are 3 main reasons why people, both donors and recipients, enter into the kidney pair donation program. Firstly, if you are a donor and you're a non-directed anonymous donor, so a real hero, and you have a desire to help as many people as possible, then we would enter your details into the kidney pair donation program and hopefully match you up with various recipients. And as you'll see later on, produce a chain of transplants. There are some donor and recipients that are compatible, but for whatever reason, we want to try to get a better match for them. So that could be a better age match with their donor, a better size match, or a better HLA match with their donor. And for those reasons, we would put those compatible pairs into the kidney pair donation program and see if we can get a better matched kidney for them. But by far the most common reason why pairs come into the kidney pair donation is that they are incompatible. And you'll see in the next few slides how we result in a number of transplants with these incompatible pairs. Next slide, please. So the first way we produce these transplants is we have a very common scenario where we have pair A and pair B. They're incompatible with each other. We put them into the paired exchange program and we find out that living donor B is compatible with transplant candidate A, and vice versa, living donor A is compatible with transplant candidate B, and we proceed to transplantation for those two individuals. We basically swap those kidneys and we get two people with a functioning kidney transplant. The other possible way, very similar, is just to the next slide, please, is a closed chain. This is where we have 3 or more individuals that are all incompatible with their between the donor and recipient, and our computer program matches all these folks up, where the last living donor, you can see their living donor C, ends up donating their kidney to transplant candidate A, and we end up with 3 successful kidney transplants. And these chains can be anywhere from 3 to 6 number of transplants in length. And lastly, the next slide, please. One of the most important ways we get transplants is, as I mentioned, from the NDADs, or the non-directed anonymous donor. They enter into the kidney pair donation program and we match them up with a transplant candidate that's waiting. And the huge benefit of these domino chains is that the donor at the end of that chain donates their kidney to a patient on the wait list. So that patient who's on the wait list gets a gift of a living donor kidney transplant. So not only do we benefit people who already have living donors, but we also benefit a person who's been waiting for a deceased donor kidney transplant. Next slide, please. And since the KPD program has started back in 2009, up until the end of March, we've done 787 transplants. You can see the breakdown of the different blood type. You can see that 200 of these, almost 210 transplants have been preemptive. That's the goal, that's the ideal situation. And these are 787 transplants that we could not have performed without the kidney pair donation program. So it's been a very vital program for donor and recipients in Canada, and really has improved the quality of life of many of these transplant recipients. Next slide, please. The next main learning point I'd like to take away from today is that living kidney donation is safe. We are very, very selective of which donors that come forward that we approve to proceed to donation. We want to ensure that their health in the future is not affected by the process of living kidney donation. These are people that do not need to undergo this surgery. It's their own, by their own choice. They want to give this gift of their kidney to somebody who needs it. So we really do a lot of testing. We ensure that the safety of that living kidney donor is paramount and is very important. So it does take a long time for a living kidney donor to be approved, just because of all the testing that they undergo. Next slide, please. And many people ask about the risks of kidney failure in living kidney donors. So this is a slide of 1,000 various people emojis. And in Canada right now, about 1.5 people for every 1,000 Canadians has end-stage kidney disease. So that means they're either on dialysis or they have a functioning transplant. If you donated a kidney 15 years after that donation, next slide, please, that risk goes up to 3 in 1,000. So you might think that that's a big increase. That's a double risk. But as you can see with this picture, with all those people, only 3 of them end up on dialysis. So it's still a very, very rare event. And as I mentioned earlier, we really try our best to ensure that the safety and the health of living kidney donors is maintained after their donation. And most of the time, the people that end up on dialysis, unfortunately, after they donate a kidney, these are things that are very, very unpredictable and likely would have resulted in end-stage kidney disease, even if they had 2 kidneys. So it's just sometimes those risks that we can't predict, and they do happen. Fortunately, if there is a living donor that does end up on dialysis, we have a number of programs within each local center to try to get that living donor off of dialysis and with a functioning transplant. So most transplant programs would prioritize somebody who's been a living donor for a transplant for themselves. So we try our best to prevent a living donor from suffering too much as a result of the living donation. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd take another poll and just see, this is more so for the people with chronic kidney disease, either on dialysis or not on dialysis, just to see where you are in your journey of living donation. So we'll just go to the second poll question. And I wanted to see if anybody has already talked to somebody about living donation, if you're already planning living donation surgery, if you've got a living donor that's committed to you. We can close that poll whenever you're ready, Janice. Okay, well, that's great that 37% of you have a living donor that's already committed, and hopefully after today's talk, we'll help out those 63% of people that are looking for a living kidney donor. Great, thank you for answering that. Next slide. So it's really important to think about where you are in sort of the stages of making that ask to your family, to your friends about living donation. And there's a number of various stages. I'm not going to go into all that detail today, but pre-contemplation, I'm not thinking about it at all. Contemplation, I'm just starting to think about it. Preparation, I have thought about it. And action, I've actually talked to someone and we're going to do something about it. And your social worker or your kidney disease team can definitely help you identify where you are within these stages of change and help you move along those stages to get to the action stage where you're speaking to somebody and you're proceeding with living donation. Next slide, please. So how do I make the ask? And this is a very difficult question for many people. How do I go to somebody and say, hey, can I have one of your kidneys? Next slide, please. And I think that one of the most important things is to just share your story. We're going to hear some very powerful stories today, and those stories are very moving. So share that story with people. Share your options, what options you have, whether it's dialysis, whether it's a deceased donor kidney transplant or a living donor transplant. Share the benefits of living donor transplant and what that means specifically to you, that you can now go back to work, or you can travel with your family, or you can spend more time with your grandchildren, and share that story not only with your direct family, but in all the people within your circle of friends, and have those people share it within their circle of friends. And all of a sudden you've got 8 or 10 circle of friends that know about you and know about your story and the journey that you're going on. And I'm certain that one of those people will think about living donation, or more of those people will think about living donation and think about how can I help this person? Next slide, please. Lots of people are thinking about public solicitation, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with public solicitation of to share your story online on social media. I would ask you to be a little cautious because you are sharing some personal information on social media sites, which are, as you all know, not very safe and can be used by anybody out there. And it's always a good idea to talk to your transplant program, ask them about what their thoughts are, what their policies are about public solicitation. We as Canadians and the Canadian Society of Transplant has put forth a position statement stating that public solicitation of a living donor is okay, but it needs to be done appropriately and safely. And please remember, and by far the most important aspect of public solicitation is that it is illegal to provide any payment or gifts in exchange for a living donor kidney. So that we know is illegal and not allowed in Canada or across the world, but definitely sharing your story over social media is absolutely acceptable. Next slide, please. And you can't see that, I don't think you can see start early very well. It didn't come through the slides very well, but do start early. In Canada, it takes probably just under a year for a living donor to come forward and actually go through the entire workup process. So if you're hoping for a preemptive transplant where you don't need to use dialysis, keep that in your mind that you need a year before that happens. So talk with your kidney disease team, talk with your transplant team, make sure that they're also thinking about starting early so that you are getting yourself worked up to make sure that transplant is suitable for you, so that when it comes time that your donor is ready, you can proceed to your surgery and have a successful transplant. And with that, I will close and we'll answer questions later on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Mainra. I will now invite Chief Recalmer to share his story with us.
Good afternoon again. Yeah, my journeys, like I said in my bio, started with, I thought I had the flu. It turned out I didn't. It was a shock to us, to my family. And the first time that I even considered doing anything with going public about it was I talked to my surgeon in St. Paul's, and the question he gave me was, "You're a chief, right?" So I go, "Yes, I am." "You must know somebody in media." "Yes, I do." So we said, "Go there, go public with your story." So I phoned to somebody in the news part of my world, and I was told, "No, you're on the news for 15 seconds, and then you're gone." And then within probably 2 weeks, I was approached by Kidney Plugged In relation with the Kidney Foundation of BC Yukon to do a video about my story, how it happened, support that I get, support my wife gets. And we did this video. And while we were doing the video on our campsite, 2 people that were watching this asked me, "So what are you doing over there in this field?" And so I explained what we were doing. And it was kind of, "Well, let me know when it's online." So I did. They were staying on our camera, like I had said. And so I let them both know that it was coming on the air. And within months thereafter, each one of them contacted me and said they thought about it, talked to their husbands about it, and I wonder how they could help. What do I do? What's their next step to potentially donate to me? And at the same time this was going on, even through my work, I had many people try, just to do the blood work to find out what is their blood type. And I told many people, had somebody asked me 3 years ago, what is my blood type? I would have said red. I had no idea I was O positive. But now I know. And so people were trying to see what they could do. And then another fellow in my political world, he stepped forward to start going through the process. And then another lady from political life, she stepped forward to see, okay, what do I do now? I've had a long time to think about this. Again, I want to know, what can I do? And people have said, you've got a lot of work left to do in your career, plus the quality of life. I'm on a PD, and I had a failure again, so I'm back on hemodialysis for a while. But I mean, that's just the life of a kidney patient, I would presume. And I don't know how. I mean, I've never really gone out and asked people for their kidneys. It's just my video we did, and the newspaper article after that. That was the same thing. One of the last thing I ever said to people in both circumstances was, I'm an O positive. I'm an O. You know, if you're willing, that's what you can do to that or somebody else. And two of the people have said they would share with them to others. If they don't match me, they'll go somewhere else to that program that the doctor spoke about. And really, that's and apart from my might be my support system, my caregiver, the journey just continues, ups and downs. Supporting of me, supporting of her is paramount, and the support from other kidney patients that I've learned about through joining the chapter, our local chapter of the Kidney Foundation. We've all got a story. We all have a story of one kind or another, and I would really like to thank. You say thank you for people inviting me to this seminar. It's a lot to learn. One of my donors just texted me and said, "Is I think it's today, this webinar," and so we let him know it's going on as we speak. So he's probably one of the 140 watching today, and that's not much more to my story other than that. And like I said, I'm just hopeful that this will, I will get one. I will get a donor. And other than that, my quality of life is not bad. And thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Chief Recalmer. Really appreciate that. And if anybody has any questions, please do post them in the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end of all the patient presentations. Over to you, Ali.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Ali, and I thought just to start off the presentation, I might provide a little context and background as to how I got here. So when I was 5 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I'm very fortunate to be sort of raised by sick kids and had a really supportive family who, throughout my diagnosis, really encouraged me to not let diabetes get in the way or stop me, and encouraged me to not let the disease define me. And so for many years thereafter, I pursued my dreams and my ambitions in many ways without any limitations. And one of the books that I had read very sort of early on in my career was a book by Sheryl Sandberg, and I promise this will be relevant later in the presentation. But one of her anecdotes is, what would happen if you were just never afraid? And from a professional perspective, I always kept that in mind and thought that it was a really advantageous way to go about my career. And so I pursued a career in corporate communications at the Toronto Stock Exchange, at an investment bank, or at a law firm, and was really happy and living a very normal, by all means, life as a 30-year-old. And then at the start of 2018, what I had sort of realized is that the disease was starting to take a little bit of control over me. I had lost temporarily vision in my left eye and developed diabetic retinopathy and had to have surgery to reattach my retina to my left eye. I was, very grateful to have not lost my vision, but certainly it was a bit of a scare. And then later on in 2018, I was rushed to the emergency room with a blood pressure of like 220 over 150, and was told that I had end-stage kidney failure. And it was quite alarming. And it was sort of the first time that I felt that I had failed at something. I felt that the disease had really taken a hold of me and it was defining me. And so it was a little bit of a setback, as one can imagine. It was quite devastating. And so I had my first appointment at the clinic, and they said, you know, your kidney function is at about 20% and you're going to need a kidney transplant. And my whole life changed from that moment on. I went on the renal diet, as many of you will know. I, you know, completely changed the way that I was addressing my healthcare, all sort of with a view of trying to avoid dialysis and maintain my kidney function for as long as I could. And then the pandemic hit and my kidney function continued to decline, probably at a bit of an accelerated rate than previously. And I got a call from my doctor saying, you know, it's time, we need to find a donor. And so the inevitable ask was presented to me. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was driving down the highway with my mom, and I had seen a poster on the side of the road, or a sign on the side of the road, with a woman asking for a kidney. And one of the things, the first thought that came to my mind was, I wonder what happened to this woman. And, you know, as I was thinking about how I was going to ask people in a pandemic without having the ability to physically meet with people, I thought, I don't want people to wonder what happened to me. I want people to wonder how they can help. And so for me, I sort of went back to my Sheryl Sandberg, what would happen if I wasn't afraid? And I said, I'm just going to put it all out there. And I sat down on my living room floor and I made a video on LinkedIn, which is, you can see in the slide. And I told my story, and I was radically transparent about how I had gotten to this point, what I needed. And even if, you know, people weren't willing to give a kidney, how else they could help. And I've been radically transparent ever since. And I thought that perhaps maybe a couple people would share my story. I didn't really have any expectations. And I was so surprised to see that thousands of people shared my story. And, you know, it was picked up by CTV News. It reached corners of the country that, you know, I didn't even know existed. And it's such a touching feeling to be offered a second chance at life. And when your life is on the line, I really feel like the most brave thing you can do is asking for help, and not being afraid of how you got there, not feeling ashamed of how you got there, but really putting you know, your life in your own hands and taking control. So, you know, my situation has changed. I've since decided to pursue a kidney and a pancreas to cure both the chronic kidney disease as well as my type 1 diabetes. But on the whole, what I would really encourage people to do is to be brave and to not be afraid. And you know, what will come back to you, I think, will surprise you over and over again. And this can be a lonely journey if you don't feel like you're supported. And by sharing your story and sharing, you know, the day-to-day impact of this disease, I think you can really provide a line of sight and be a catalyst for change. You know, as it relates to kidney disease, it's such a silent killer, and nobody should have to suffer in silence. So yeah, that's really my story. Thank you so much for listening. Merci, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Ali. And last but not least, Sean.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm not used to wearing the headphones, but I like others, I'll give a little bit of my backstory. I got a hold of the PowerPoint deck, so I threw my pictures into a series. So mine will look a little bit different. Just so you know, I am a lifelong kidney patient. I was first diagnosed 1 month after I was born with a urinary blockage. I wore a ureterostomy on my side until I was 9 years old when it was removed. I received my first kidney transplant from my little brother in 1998. So you can see lots of time has passed there from 1971, when some of you probably still remember the Kidney Foundation used to do fundraisers selling salted peanuts. I don't think we do that anymore for kidney health, but those were the days. 1 year post-transplant, I was also a post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder survivor. So my brother and I had a mismatch on mono, or Epstein-Barr virus, and I acquired it through his kidney, and it put me out of commission for 6 weeks in the ICU. That's a little bit relevant to a piece I'll say at the bottom here. That kidney lasted for 21 years to the day, but as Dr. Mainra says, as soon as I knew that I was going to be moving towards being relisted, I began the search for living donors at that point in time. And I was put on the only eligible to be on the Edmonton deceased donor wait list once my peritoneal dialysis started. And the very last point on there, the CPRA of 86%, is actually related to one of the questions that came through in the Q&A. Yes, after my first living donor transplant, I did acquire some antibodies to my brother's kidney. I also developed 2 of my antibodies, so I have 6 total, 2 of my antibodies as a result of that PTLD, the lymphoproliferative disorder, because I accepted blood products at that time, and that is another way that you can become sensitized. So there's hopefully that helps answer the one Q&A question. Next slide. My very first time through this, so I'll kind of give the living donor recruitment strategy of both of my instances. My mom, you can see me on the right and my brother on the left, mom and dad in the middle. My mom has multiple sclerosis. She knew right off the bat in 1997, 98 that she was not going to be able to be a donor for me. But she became my advocate. And it is an interesting way to go. There wasn't social media. My mom and dad were definitely far more attached and involved with our larger family, cousins, uncles, aunts, and things like that. And she single-handedly recruited 12 different people, almost entirely from family and plus a few church friends, to at least approach the living donor program and at least begin to see if they were a potential match. In the end, my brother there was found to be a good match for me, and we proceeded very quickly after that. But I wouldn't want to underestimate the fact that your spouse, your mom, your dad, your partner, there are other people in your life who can go after their networks and their people, and sometimes even say things that are more difficult for you to say, because they're well, in my case, it was my mom. She can, moms are just protected that way. And so, and as to Dr. Mainra's point about are people worried about living donors and their long-term health? My brother went on to get married. He has 2 kids, and he is an active ER physician fighting COVID, fighting the COVID battle as an ER physician. He himself does not have COVID, and he is in a thriving practice. Next slide. So when that transplant, or the first transplant, began to fail, I didn't rely on mom this time. I decided to do much more like Ali, tell my story, tell it as a journey, be authentic about the ups and the downs. Part of anybody who followed my social media or has heard me speak before knows that I'm very much a proponent of, you still have to look after yourself. You still have to stay positive through everything that's going on. So, I tried to stay active as much as I could through dialysis. I tried to continue camping. As you can imagine, I work for Canadian Blood Services. We're a national agency. Even with my peritoneal dialysis machine, I continued going to meetings. I did meetings in Montreal. I did meetings in Vancouver. I did meetings in Ottawa. And you just had the supplies shipped to you. And I documented that part of my journey as well. Not just the fact that, you know, my health is failing and I need a kidney, but just so people could see the whole journey, I guess. So this snapshot from my social media really kicked off that campaign for me, just saying, I don't know what's coming, but I can now begin looking for living donors. Next slide. Another thing that I took to was not just raising awareness for me, but for all living donation and or even deceased donation. Everybody can do something in the way of supporting organ donation. And so I did actively retweet things from Canadian Blood Services or from CDTRP or Kidney Foundation and things like that, just you know, to be a general advocate for all of us in living this life. Next slide. So this would be April 2nd, 2019. So this was the point at which I had been working up or had a number of people getting worked up as potential donors that had stepped forward through my social media and things like that. But the time was basically running out and I had to start looking at my dialysis options so again, keeping my journey authentic, I was telling this story as well. I'm actually, and one other venue that I was doing this through was through some public speaking. I'm actually excited to see one of my own church members on the participant list because she was there when I spoke at my church. They gave me an opportunity to speak in front of 400 or 500 people, and it generated lots of conversations and a few potential donors as well. So never underestimate the power of your family and your friends and all of those other communities that you represent, and because they are all great places to start conversations. Next slide. August 4th was the start of my peritoneal dialysis, and so I kind of considered it to be the end point for my first transplanted kidney. So this was a bit of an anniversary, and it was also the very first day of peritoneal dialysis, all in one. Again, keep the story moving. Next slide. Keep telling the journey, stay authentic. The first picture is me doing manual PD in my desk at Canadian Blood Services here in Edmonton. The second one is a hotel room in Ottawa doing peritoneal dialysis. And then I also had an 8-week stint where my PD had failed briefly, the same as the chief had said. And so I ended up on hemo for a period in center right at the start of wave 1 of the COVID pandemic. So that was a fascinating time to be navigating the hospital 3 times a week as the hospitals were just figuring out what to do. Next slide. So I blocked out all the names and things like that, but I kept track of all the different people from start to finish who reached out to me, whether it was through a text message, whether it was through Facebook. Many times it was also confirmed by the living donor programs. I think in the end, across all of this, and I have to say I work in an amazing industry because I get to work in organ donation for a living. The groups that this entailed, obviously it was, my mom and my dad and others like that would come forward and get immediately turned down for age or MS or things like that. But I had a transplant nephrologist sign up. I had 2 tissue typing lab directors sign up as potential living donors. I had 1 ODO executive, the head of their ODO, sign up. And so many people like that who you connect with on a daily basis through work. I had a couple of folks from church. I had many cousins and even an aunt and an uncle who signed up, and it was absolutely overwhelming. But you see here at the point that I cut it off was 32. I think by the very end there was 36 people. And the one other thing that was really the most gratifying for me in all this was after I found a donor, you'll see in the next 2 slides, after I found a donor, 3 of those people who found out they weren't a match to me have proceeded. 1 has donated as an anonymous donor, and the other 2 are still actively in workup as potential anonymous donors. So not only did I do something that raised awareness of my need, but inspired people that, hey, there's these other programs, kidney pair donation, I can make a difference. I was completely ready to give to Sean, and my mind was already on that frame of mind, and they've converted into anonymous donors from that, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So next slide, please. So as you see, I went through 34, 36 people. And the funniest thing of all of it, all the things that I've told you about, the great authenticity and tell your story and all those kinds of things, none of it had anything to do with how I found my donor ultimately. I got a text one day from a mutual friend, and this is a snapshot of it. And a few of you at the Kidney Foundation know who this person is, but it basically says, hey, we've got someone that we've been talking to. They want some help because their workup as an anonymous donor is taking a long time. And she's hoping that if she considered a directed donation, that she could still, that she could perhaps speed up the process. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But we started a conversation at that point in time, regardless. And next slide, please. And that's her. That's my my new buddy Brenda, and I now have her. I've named her my kidney after her middle name, so it's my new kidney is Lynn, and she has an amazing sense of humor, and so we had a bet going on who was going to get to the other person's room first after surgery. Obviously, she won. I'm still catheterized and everything else down below, but she also brought. Just click one more time. She makes these for fun. She has a small business with making cups and coffee mugs and all these kinds of things. And she made one of these for me and one for her. And so we had our first, let's just say, in-hospital beverage out of these coffee cups. Next slide, last slide actually for me. And click again. So the only thing that I think overall that I would do differently if I was to start the last 2.5 years over again is exactly like Dr. Maynor said. I would actively and heavily promote pair donation far more. It sounds goofy when you remember my bio. I was part of the team that built the very first pair donation program for Canada. And in my head, I assumed potential donors would get that message very, very loud and clear from the living donor programs. And they do, they get a brochure and they're told that this is another option and things like that. But I think I would be much more adamant and use wording similar to what Dr. Maynor said. And that would be, as long as you are a healthy donor, everything else won't matter, because you can either donate to me or you can donate indirectly to me through paired exchange. And I found probably 5 or 6 people found out, I think in their head, they had completely set in their head that they were going to donate only to me. And then when they found out that they were usually HLA compatible, they already knew their blood group. Once they found out that they were tissue typing incompatible, they pulled out at that point. And so once they'd already set and kind of taken that deep breath, they weren't really interested or open to talking about paired donation much anymore after that. So I think just focusing on the opportunity, exactly like Dr. Maynor said, as long as you are a healthy, compatible, or healthy donor of any kind, regardless of the blood group, regardless of the tissue typing and the cross matching that's done, don't worry about it. We have solutions that will help this go forward. And the website is down at the bottom there. It's also in the resources, and I've noticed Philippe has been putting the links into the chat as well. But that would absolutely be the other thing that I would do far differently. And that's the last of my presentation. The next slide, I believe, is some of those very resources.
Thank you so much for that, Sean, and to all our panelists. Just that candid honesty that you showed us was just amazing, and some very incredible stories that you've shared with us today. So very, very grateful that you've been able to share that with our audience today. So this is a reminder for our participants to submit their questions for the presenters by typing them into the Q&A box, which is found in the Zoom toolbar on a PC at the bottom of the meeting window. Please avoid using the chat box to submit your questions, because this way we can actually see them if they're in the Q&A box. Thank you to those who have pre-submitted your questions. Because of the volume of questions submitted, your exact question may not be able to be answered directly, but we will do our best to answer all the questions that have come through so far. Also, please note that we're unable to provide medical advice for the specific issues that people have raised. So I might start with some of the questions that we've had pre-submitted to us already, and some of them are very similar to the questions that people have been asking today. And this is a bit of a practical question. So Dr. Mainra or even Sean, I might ask you to speak to this particular question. And it's where is the kidney placed over an existing kidney during a transplant?
I know where mine are, but Rahul's probably the best person to answer.
No, you can answer that, Sean.
Both of my living donor kidneys went into my abdomen. So I don't know why it's different from the first kidney to the second, but my first one caused me about 1.5 inches change in my waist size.
Thank you very much. We've also had a question about any financial assistance offered to living donors as part of the process, and what helps and assistance is available for living donors. And all provinces in Canada have a living organ donor expense reimbursement program that reimburses some of the out-of-pocket costs for patients, for living donors, and it makes it possible to become a living donor. The program is designed to remove financial barriers and increase the number of potential donors. It covers things such as travel, accommodation, parking, meals, and sometimes loss of income during the assessment and donation of an organ, be that a kidney or live liver. And the criteria just differ depending on which province people are from. But there is more information on our website, kidney.ca, about the living organ donor reimbursement programs. Because there are some differences in each province, it's worthwhile having a look at those and familiarising yourselves with those. There's also been a lot of questions and a bit of a theme, and Dr. Mainra, I might get you to speak to this. I see that Sean's answered a few, and Dr. Mainra, you've answered a few questions too. But it's just about having multiple blood transfusions or being highly sensitized to previous transplants or having a pregnancy. How do people find a match for a new kidney in these instances, and whether you could just expand a little bit about highly sensitized patients today?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're very correct in if people that are highly sensitized from transfusions or pregnancies or prior transplants, it does make it more challenging to find a compatible donor. And I think there was a question about having more than one donor. So if you do have a living donor that's not compatible with you because you're highly sensitized, entering into the kidney pair donation will help, because then you're exposed to other donors within the registry that may be compatible to you. And as Sean showed in his story, having more than one donor definitely helps, because the chances are, once again, of trying to find a compatible donor increases. If you get to a certain level of sensitization in Canada, and that level would be 95% CPRA, which means that 95% of potential donors that you're not compatible to, then you're entered into a national registry called the Highly Sensitized Patient Registry. Once again, one of Sean's projects. And this registry has also produced, I think, Sean, you can correct me, about 650 transplants since it started
We hit 700 on Saturday.
700 transplants for very highly sensitized patients. And the way this program works, it's with a deceased donor. But if I had a patient here in Saskatchewan who was highly sensitized, they would receive a transplant from a kidney that comes up across the country that they're compatible to. Normally, kidneys stay within the province and they're allocated within the province, but one kidney enters into the highly sensitized patient registry to help these patients that are very hard to match across the country.
And I wouldn't underestimate how much the kidney pair donation has done for highly sensitized. Some of these patients are waiting 5, 10, 20 years on dialysis, and they are still producing results. They have not yet been transplanted, but there is actually a patient who was entered in the pair donation system 9 years ago, who just got their very first match, and they're working through the process right now. So we use like an ID number, and the ID numbers are in the low 20s. And we have 6,000 people that have gone and registered in the program so far.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Just speaking about the kidney paired exchange program, what is the biggest chain that has ever been done in Canada for the paired exchange program?
That's a great question. Some of you who are familiar with the American systems know that some of them put out big world record 50, 60, 70 transplant chains. I believe our longest one here was 9. We proposed one as long as 13, but because of other factors, we did truncate it back to 9. But typically, remind me, Rahul, I think we generally only look for 6 right now, but that is being actively evaluated every year.
Thank you very much. And a question I think that might resonate with Chief Recalmer and Ali, and of course, Sean, please pipe in if there's anything else you'd like to add as well. There have been some patients who have reached out to a number of people. One person commented that they've had 60 relatives and no one's offered. Immediate family have declined. Do you have any hints or tips or suggestions for people whose close family are unable to donate for one reason or another? And you may not, and that's fine too. Then I'll throw it over to Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe just comment. I think, maybe looking for creative solutions, not just relying on an email or a conversation, like really putting yourself out there and exploring different options, particularly in a pandemic. It can be, I think, exceptionally challenging to get the message out there. So, taking into consideration whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or, a community newsletter, taking into account all the places that people are active and reading and trying to really insert yourself into those platforms so that you can amplify your story.
I would have to agree. And of course, being an Indigenous person, my family is very, very large. And so some of my family tried. And, what I don't know is how many from outside my immediate family did try to see what they could do for me. And again, you've got to put yourself out there to let it be known. And believe me, when I went into renal failure, that being a chief, that Mox and Telegraph works really fast to let you know, just one of us is for lack of better words down, and and then the message started coming through as what can we do, what can people do for, and again I was and Sharon very new to this, so we didn't know the procedure to go looking for a donor, but we learned very quickly, kind of initiation by fire, just to get your story out there. That always seems to be what you have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really great points. And I think also Sean raised another point, particularly for people who may not be social media savvy, who may not
have large groups of people that they can tap into. Having an advocate, Sean, you spoke of your mum being an advocate, and you know the power of having somebody there to go to bat for you is never underestimated. And if you have some champion there by your side, I'm sure that is also a very useful and helpful way of navigating this particular journey. Thank you. Sorry, we've just got a lot of questions, so I'm going through them, and it's wonderful to have all these questions coming through. And, you know, we've had a question about having an upper age limit for any form of kidney transplant. I was wondering if Dr. Mainra, you'd like to speak about what some of the criteria are for being accepted onto a transplant list.
Yeah, sure. I think there was a question about both the age limits for donors and recipients. So, so I'll start off with the recipients, and a lot of it depends on their overall health as opposed to an actual age and a number of how many years old you are. We need to make sure that transplant recipients are going to benefit from a kidney transplant. So we want to make sure that their heart function is okay, their lung function is okay, that they don't have any other underlying health concerns that are going to pose or going to become a bigger problem after transplant that would possibly result in that kidney transplant not working to its fullest possibility. So many programs don't necessarily have an upper age limit, but more of how healthy you are and how controlled some of your health problems are. If they're well managed and controlled, we know that transplanting people that are 70 or 75 years old will still benefit from a kidney transplant. But it's very, you know, those are very general terms and general policies that vary very much based on each person. And similarly for a donor, once again, it does depend a lot on the health and the kidney function of the donor, but it's a little bit more strict, I think, in the donor workup, just because we want to ensure that we don't harm the donor's health after their donation. So most programs have an upper age limit of about 70 for living donors.
I think the message I would say is don't rule yourself out. Ask the living donor program and at least, you know, start the initial questions because you know your level of health is very, you know, unknown until you start getting into some of those testing. Just a personal story, actually about one of my living donors or potential living donors that began the workup and couldn't proceed. He's a friend of mine through church. He signed up, he went in for some testing. He was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. So obviously he was ruled out as a potential donor, but because he had inherited the condition, all of his children were checked out. One of them had it, and in the last 6 months, his son ended up with a heart transplant. They had no idea they even had family history of heart. So it was actually very beneficial to even begin the workup for him and not rule himself out because of weight or things like that. I mean, nothing to do with me. It was just that workup process is quite thorough. They're going to do everything to look after you, but in a few cases, you find out something that you can do something about. And in this particular case, they had a heads up and were able to save their son's life. Very, very crazy story, but.
Thank you very much. I also have some questions about people whose kidney function is in the low teens, so 13%, 15%, and their medical teams are not urgently suggesting that they pursue a transplant at this stage, but they're just looking at when should people have a sense of urgency to start looking for a living donor, particularly if they've got CKD that is moving along towards needing some renal replacement therapy.
So that's a really good question. And I hear a lot of patients who experience this sometimes where the kidney team doesn't feel that things are as urgent. And I think as Sean sort of mentioned and provided in his story, it takes a long time to find a living donor. And it's always a good idea to start early, at least to have those, to share your story, to ask those questions, to go through those stages of change and get to the action stage. You know, most programs across the country will have different criteria for when they will accept a patient to be worked up for transplant. And generally around 15 or 20 would be most programs. If you had a living donor already, then we would accept you to go through the process of being worked up at about a kidney function of about 20%. Whereas if you don't have a living donor, then it would be a bit lower because usually people don't get a deceased donor transplant until they're on dialysis. And it also depends on your type of kidney disease. Some kidney diseases, you know, if you had certain types of kidney disease, they can worsen much faster than others. So if over the past number of years, it's been sitting at 15 for many, many years, then yeah, the urgency isn't as much compared to if it was 20 last year and now it's 15, then definitely the urgency is much more.
Thank you. That's some really great information. I'm hoping that will answer a few people's questions. I've got a question here. What is the most difficult thing? And this is aimed actually at our patient panelists. What is the most difficult thing you've had to overcome before deciding to talk about your need for a kidney transplant?
I would agree with Ali. Fear. You got to get over that fear, and you've got to, when you put yourself out there, it's quite scary. And you've also got to put your faith to whomever to trust what you're doing. I said that in my video. I had to learn to trust people that are looking after me now, because I have no control over what's going on. I had to learn trust, and I had to not be afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with you and agree with myself. I think admitting failure can be challenging, and choosing not to view it as failure, but really to view it as, you know, sort of just a part of the process. I think the other thing to keep in mind is to not lose hope. I think it can be really challenging, you know, particularly as people will have special circumstances that may prevent them from having the perfect transplant, and reconciling that it's not going to be perfect, and to not lose hope, but to continue to see sort of the best in yourself, and trust that, you know, when the time is ready, it will come.
I absolutely agree. I have a very different life experience because I don't know a life without kidney disease. It has been my entire existence. So anybody who knows me well knows me as a transplant recipient, a kidney failure patient, the kid who had a bag on his side, whatever, however you knew me at whichever phase of life. So I think being a patient for 49 years now, just makes you a bit of an open book. So I don't think I necessarily had some of the same fears to get over because this has been my life, and anybody who knows me knows that's been my life for a very long time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your honesty. I know it's hard to be so open about something that is very sensitive to many people. The other thing that the Kidney Foundation can help with, if anybody who is attending this webinar needs it, we do have Kidney Connect peer support. So there are other patients who have either asked for living kidney donors, or other living kidney donors who might want to speak to other living kidney donors. We'll get Philippe and Chantel to put the information into the chat box so you can find those resources. I've got another question for Dr. Mainra here, just talking a little bit more about the workup process for a living donor. And this person actually has a family-based kidney disease, and they're wondering if those people will be tested for any of those familial genetic kidney diseases as part of the workup process.
Yeah, that's a great question. There definitely are some genetic kidney diseases where we would proceed to doing genetic testing in the donor. Sometimes, for example, polycystic kidney disease, depending on the age of that donor, you can do an ultrasound of the kidneys, and that's a pretty good test to rule in or rule out whether or not that person has inherited the genetic kidney disease. But there are other genetic kidney diseases also that where you would consider doing further genetic tests, and your donor team would be able to help you determine whether or not in your circumstance that would be indicated.
Thank you very much. And I've got several questions that have come through from the living donor perspective. The first one is about how big's the scar, and what does the surgery entail for a living donor?
So I'm not a surgeon, full disclosure there, but generally speaking, most programs and for most living donors, it's done through keyhole or laparoscopic surgery. So there's one larger scar sort of in the midline where they have to remove the kidney. So that incision has to be a little bit bigger. And then the other two ports or the other two incisions are pretty small, just large enough for them to get their laparoscopic ports that go in. So most of the time you end up with 3 little incisions, one of them being a bit bigger than the other two. That's the standard for most people. There are some instances where the kidney is a little bit more complicated to remove. And in those instances, you would do what's called an open nephrectomy, where they actually have to make a larger incision, and they don't use the laparoscopic tools, but they actually go in there with their hands and remove the kidney that way.
One thing that was a little bit interesting with my latest living donor is they did a laparoscopic procedure, but they actually used her C-section midline scar. So she didn't have any new big scar. It was literally down the one that she already had. Just a way to reduce overall scarring, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And somebody here has been a liver donor before, and they're just wondering what the recovery time is like. Is it the same as liver donation? Generally, what is the recovery time for a living donor?
So living liver donation is definitely a lot more involved than being a living kidney donor. The incision is definitely bigger. So the recovery time for a living kidney donor, I usually tell donors that within about 6 weeks or so, they're generally feeling back to normal and usually back to work. I would imagine, and I'm not going to try to answer this accurately because I don't see liver donors, but I would imagine that might be a little bit longer than that, just because the surgery is a little bit more involved.
Thank you. And we're coming up to one of our last questions, unless anybody else would like to submit any questions. And it's once again in regards to the living donor workup, and whether some conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes rule out people for living donation, or can they still be tested?
So I think, as Sean mentioned, don't rule yourself out on your own. Present your information, talk to a transplant team or a donation team, and see whether or not you're suitable, and whether or not you would be able to be a kidney donor. But definitely there are some instances, medical problems where you wouldn't be able to be a living kidney donor. For example, if you did have diabetes and you were on medication for that, then the risk of giving up one of your kidneys would be too high for you, for your future health. People with well-controlled high blood pressure and have no other medical problems can still be living kidney donors. But it's the most important thing is to talk to your donation team and present your medical history to see if you would be eligible to donate a kidney. And if you can't donate a living kidney donor, then make sure you sign your organ registry, sign up for organ registry so that you can become a deceased donor when that time comes.
Thank you, an all-important point there, Dr. Mainra. Thank you very much for that. And before I hand over to final comments from panelists, I've just got one comment from our audience today, and it's from a living donor who donated 8 years ago, and she just wanted to let everybody know that her scar is almost invisible now. So I was just passing that on. Just wondering if there's any final words from our panelists that you'd like to share today before we get ready to sign off. And everybody's gone quiet on me now.
I think I'll speak up because I like to talk, but I think Sean and the Chief and Ali presented some very heroic stories, and you know, they're very, very brave people, and I think bravery definitely came up in how they presented their stories, and I can only I'm in awe of their bravery and honored to be with them in this type of a setting in this panel. And it's a difficult journey, but being brave, being honest, as these folks have mentioned, are really, really important.
And I think if you're new to the process, you haven't been a lifelong patient, and you do want some of that guidance, there are resources through the Kidney Foundation. They have kidney mentoring programs. Your own transplant center may have a kidney mentoring program that can hook you up with someone who's just a little further ahead in the process than you, or has already walked in your footsteps, and can help in answering some of the questions, especially the more personal ones and stuff that you're not necessarily going to ask to your physician team or things like that. But many of those programs have pre-trained those mentors to make sure that they're all giving good, accurate information, and they can just be another voice of reason in an otherwise chaotic period of your life.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm so grateful to all our panelists today and their bravery and honesty, as Dr. Mainra said. And thank you, Dr. Mainra, also for your expertise. And we really value having all of you here today. There's one other person I'd really like to thank, and or people actually, and that is some of our patient partners who were with us, who have actually were the brainchild behind this particular webinar. We had the honour of working with some very close patient partners on a recent event, which was a patient forum, and they strongly believed that this kind of session was desperately needed out there for people looking for a living donor. And so we listened to them, and we came together and brought this webinar to you today because patients really thought that there was a need for this, and we're very pleased to be able to fill that need and fill that gap in that information and knowledge. So thank you to our patient partners who really were the brainchild behind this webinar today. Just in closing, I just wanted to say that the Kidney Foundation is committed to providing you information about educational resources about kidney and kidney disease. We invite you to visit our website at kidney.ca. There you can find information about recipes, information and tools to help you manage your renal diet. We can also help you through our regional branches who offer advice and support to people like you in accessing services within the healthcare system. We can also help you with developing skills for self-advocacy. We invite you to connect with us, and if you have any further questions or would like to speak to somebody in your community, please visit our website. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you for everyone for attending our webinar today, Finding Your Living Kidney Donor. When the webinar has ended, your computer will open to a new page requesting that you complete our webinar satisfaction survey. This will you'll also receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the survey if you'd like to complete complete it later. Your feedback is really important to us, and it helps us to improve our webinar series. So we appreciate if you'll take a moment to complete it. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 5 to 7 days with a link to view the on-demand recording of today's webinar. On behalf of the Kidney Foundation of Canada, thank you for joining us today. Stay well and enjoy the rest of your day.